Governor Pat Quinn signed Medicaid reform bills this week, and the state's smokers and Medicaid patients may soon be feeling the pain. That's up next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois politics and government. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues Magazine, and with me today is Kevin McDermott, Statehouse reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Andrew Thomason, Statehouse reporter with Illinois Statehouse News. Drew, thanks for being on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Well, we have some big news this week. Governor Pat Quinn signed a package of legislation that will reform the state's Medicaid program. There's a lot of different things going on here. What's making probably most news is the cuts that will happen to the program. Drew, can you outline some of the things that people who are Medicaid patients can possibly expect from reductions going forward?
Sure. So in total, the legislation cuts about $1.6 billion from the Medicaid program, and Kevin, as you said before, that's kind of a sobering number. Some of the ways they're going to achieve that, they're going to eliminate Illinois Cares RX, a prescription program for seniors in the state. They're going to make it so if you have a wheelchair and it breaks, instead of just going and getting that fixed and the person that fixes it bills Medicaid, you now have to get that approved before you get it fixed. I think the same is true for prosthetics. They're limiting the number of eyeglasses that people can get per year. There's just a lot of these different intricacies that go in, and I think there's maybe 54 items in a spreadsheet that they sent out that total up to this $1.6 billion in cuts.
Yeah, some of the other changes people will notice, limits to the number of prescriptions you can get each month, limiting to 4. Some eligibility levels have been changed for some programs, so some people will lose coverage in certain areas. And this is happening pretty quickly. Kevin, can you explain how the state's rolling this out?
The way the political system in the state works, it really caught recipients in a bind. You had this thing passed ultimately last month. The governor hadn't signed it until this morning, so the Department of Health Care and Human Services was in a position of having to inform people that their coverage is going to be cut by the end of this month, 3 weeks away from, as we're taping this, less than 3 weeks, and yet it had not been official yet. The governor hadn't signed it yet. So that 3-week window shocked a lot of people, but it would have been even shorter had they waited. The notices started going out a week ago on Friday, and the first of them, about 26,000, went out to the people that you mentioned from the eligibility cuts. It used to be that if you were an adult and you earned 185% of the federal poverty level, you could get Medicaid. That, under these changes, has been changed to 133%. So all those people caught in between there, about 26,000 people, got letters essentially saying in a month you're not going to be eligible anymore. Another 180,000 letters went out this week to mostly elderly and disabled people who are on the Illinois Cares RX program, which provides prescription help for these folks. And the letter literally starts, "We regret to inform you," the kind of letter that military families used to get when somebody was dead, and this is how the letter starts, and "We regret to inform you that you're no longer eligible for this program." I did a story on this week and talked to a lot of the providers, and one elderly woman who literally said, what do they expect us to do? I don't know what to do. I had to buy my own medicine once, and it was $171. I don't have that. I don't know what to do. Another provider told me that she's hearing again and again much older folks saying they're trying to kill us. That's kind of the view. They think that this is, that's what this is aimed at. So there's been some real shock out there over this thing, and particularly from people who don't understand how fast things have to move with something like this politically because of the way our system is. It would have been too much for our legislature to actually get this done early in the year and give people time to get used to it. They have to do everything at the last minute, and so that I think added to the problem.
Well, in working on that story, did you find that it's often falling on the providers to have to kind of let people know? I know they're getting the letters, but they probably still show up
that's
and
another
need their
thing.
health
There
care.
are a lot of these folks actually, before they even got the letter, they heard about it from their providers, and some providers are trying to call people because, it's enough of a shock to say within 3 weeks you're off, but to have to just get it in a letter. So yeah, the providers have been involved in that too. It's been, they're expecting to be inundated. Some of the social organizations, Catholic charities, things like that are, provide some of these, and I'm not sure that Catholic Charities does prescriptions, but some of these groups do prescriptions. They do referral services to other groups that do prescriptions. They're expecting to be inundated with people as these recipients look at this and go, well, now what do? I can't afford my medicine. They're also very concerned that, old folks frequently, when they're faced with a choice between medicine and food, they'll buy food and they just won't take their meds.
When working on that story, did you hear much about alternative options for these people, or?
This is going to turn out to be a patchwork of social agencies. Senior citizen centers and again, the religious organizations, the Catholic Charities kind of organizations, these can fill in some of those gaps, and the referrals are really going to be decided on where people live and what their situation is. Now, some of these folks who are on that program may still be eligible for some kind of help through Medicaid. The Illinois CARES RX is not technically a Medicaid program. It's a separate thing. So some of them will have that option too. But there's not. But if you're asking, is there one place they can all go? No, there isn't. And that's what a lot of these providers are worried about.
Well, another component of the bill is looking for people who are not actually eligible for Medicaid but are on the rolls. The state government's going to hire an outside vendor in to kind of go over the rolls and find out who might be receiving benefits who isn't technically eligible for them. And Drew, you're working on a story on this that's pretty interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So what they're trying to do is that there are people who have only submitted one paycheck stub to prove their income eligibility, people who might not even live in the state who get Illinois Medicaid, and they want to eliminate those people from the rolls. The idea is if you kick people off who aren't supposed to be on there, you'll save money and be able to treat the people who truly need it. This has been a big push, especially from the Republicans for years now, and it's finally coming to, yes, we need to do this. So the way they're going to do it is, this is a network of 2.7 million people in the state that receive Medicaid about. They say that's, if you want to save money this year, we've got to go to an outside vendor. That's way too burdensome for us, the Department of Healthcare and Family Services, to do. So they're going to this outside vendor who will compare all this myriad of databases to find out who's actually deserving of getting Medicaid and who's not, and then they'll go through and purge the rolls. But to do this, and again, to save money this year, which is kind of what was the whole impetus for this series of cuts and savings, they are skirting the normal way that the state goes about doing bids. Normally that process takes about a year, and the contracts are awarded to the bidder who has the lowest cost generally and meets all the requirements. Well, they're not going to do that this time. They're going to disregard the cost. So they're going to solicit some bids, but they're not going to look at how much they're going to have to pay this vendor. So that way they can get this up and running 90 days from the day that Governor Pat Quinn signed it today, as of this taping. So they'll have 3 months to get this vendor in place and starting to kind of do this work. And kind of the question then becomes, Illinois is a state where it's kind of known that sometimes contracts go to a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. It's one of those. The state this year is trying to unravel itself from some of the contracts that are involved with William Cellini, the power broker who was taken down by the Rod Blagojevich case. So then it becomes a question of, are you saving the taxpayers' money while at the same time giving the contract to someone who maybe doesn't deserve it, or if they do deserve it, they get it in ways that are just, don't quite pass the smell test. Maybe aren't wrong on the face of it, but don't quite seem right.
So something for reporters to watch in the future. The state's kind of balancing trying to get savings right away versus maybe not using the standard procurement process that has a lot of protections in it.
Right, definitely, and so some of that law was updated as recently, I think, as 2009, in the wake of the Rod Blagojevich scandal. So just 3 short years later, they're kind of already going around it to realize some savings. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Everybody will be watching this one so closely. I'd be a little surprised if they tried anything too blatant. I am going to be curious to see if they actually come up with a significant number of people who are on the rolls and aren't supposed to be. I've never heard anything but assumption, and it's almost taken on an urban myth kind of proportion that the rolls are just full of people who don't belong there. But they acknowledge in the next breath that they have no way of knowing that.
Right, and that's why I was asking for some hard and fast numbers. You know, why not wait a year and see, you know, how much money you're going to lose? They said that they didn't have that, but if you look in the original documentation that Governor Pat Quinn's office sent out listing the 54, 50, whatever items that I mentioned earlier, they pegged this number at $120 million in savings. So obviously they think that there's definitely some kind of, I mean, that seems like a pretty substantial amount that's going on. But like you said, it'll be interesting to see kind of when the rubber meets the road, what the reality of that is.
And it's been a matter of faith for Republicans that it's just full of waste. So if that doesn't pan out, they're probably going to have some explaining to do there. And the next gubernatorial candidate who kind of vaguely says I'll balance the budget by cutting waste might find it harder to say that too.
Well, and I think that that's a point with a lot of this Medicaid stuff, is that the assumption on what they're saving is just that, it's assumptions, and it's, you know, it'll be interesting a year from now when we look back and see if these cuts actually tallied up to what they claim they need to save.
Or anything near it. I'd be a little surprised if it does. But
well, and this is an issue that healthcare advocacy groups and like safety net hospitals have not necessarily been really huge vocal advocates of. But when looking at cuts to programs, they've really come out and said, hey, let's find people who shouldn't be on the rolls so we can treat the people who really need this. So there's been other factions that are getting behind this that maybe haven't as vocally in the past, besides just the Republicans and some of the, you know, waste, fraud, and abuse folks that want to see these things taken out of the program. So there's other factions pushing for this as well.
Which I think just goes, you know, to show how serious of a problem the increasing cost to Medicaid is in the state. When you have those groups coming out and saying that everyone is kind of, and I'm sure we've said this on this program before, but everyone has finally, you know, kind of realized the gravity of the situation. And I think, you know, not to go back too far, but that's the reason this whole thing got passed in the first place.
Well, and one of the things in this plan that Republicans don't love is the fact that part of the liability is being deferred by a cigarette tax increase instead of cuts. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about the cigarette tax increase, and especially how it interests your coverage area that's kind of on the border?
Well, it's $1 a pack increase on top of the current 98-cent state tax. And it puts Illinois, somewhere around the middle of the pack nationally in terms of cigarette tax. It's certainly not the highest. It's a lot higher, though, than our neighbor Missouri, whose current cigarette tax is, I think, 17 cents, and is the lowest in the nation. And the other states around us have varying levels, but, you know, a lot of them are lower than Illinois. And the concern is that in those border areas, like next to Missouri and next to Iowa and Wisconsin, et cetera, actually I think Wisconsin's higher, but next to Iowa, you're going to have people crossing the borders to buy their cigarettes, and while they're there, they buy their groceries and their gas and everything else. So there's you know, there are a couple of economic theories that say this kind of thing can cause patterns that actually add up to real money and ultimately lose money for the state in ways that were not calculated when they said, you know, we're going to make, and I forget what the figure was, but I think it was 130 million, well, I don't remember, but what they said they were going to make from the cigarette tax to put toward Medicaid.
Yeah, total with a federal match, I think they're saying about 700 million.
Oh, that's right, 350 million, that's right. 350 million was what they said the cigarette tax was going to bring in annually, which some opponents are scoffing at that because they say that doesn't count the money you're going to lose from people leaving. And then the feds match what you bring in from that because we're adding it to Medicaid.
Well, and then you look in, you know, modern technology, folks sometimes turn to the internet to buy cigarettes. Not entirely a legal situation.
And this could really spur a black market, there's no question that any time you increase government taxes on something, you give a little more impetus to people who are providing it in not quite legal ways.
I've noticed on our blog for the magazine, we are getting spammed constantly now when I'm writing about the cigarette tax increase by companies trying to sell cigarettes cheaply or without the tax. So there's definitely the market out there of folks that are trying to push this, take advantage of this situation.
There's an interesting argument from the people who are in favor of this, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but on the one hand they say it will raise so much money, and the other hand they say it will make people quit smoking. Well, both those things can't be true. I mean, if people quit smoking, they're not going to be making the money from the tax. I've always been waiting for somebody to explain that to us.
But then the counter argument is that the folks that quit smoking will not need as much health care possibly.
True. Yeah, that's another argument, is that smoking does add cost to health care that won't be there in the Medicaid system if fewer people are smoking. So, but like anything else here, I think that number, that 350 million, is a guess at best.
Well, while a lot of these proposals are being implemented pretty quickly, the cigarette tax, I think, Kevin, goes into effect this month, correct?
That was
The
an immediate
24th?
effective date, yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, and you'll probably be seeing it on the shelves before that, because it's not unusual for stores to sort of try and get a jump on that and immediately jack their prices up with something that's this high profile.
But while a lot of these things are being implemented pretty quickly, the state still kind of has to go back and dot some I's and cross some T's when it comes to making rules having to do with this legislation, when it comes to getting clearance from the federal government. Drew, can you speak a little bit to some of the things that will have to be done going forward?
Sure. On some of these things, they're going to need federal waivers. You have to basically petition the federal government and say, we want to do this. We have legislation that authorizes us to do this. Can we do this? Then the federal government will write back and say yes or no, basically. So there's that. And then some of these things, the passed in the legislation, it's going to be up to the departments, which are ultimately under the control of Governor Pat Quinn, to implement some of these things and to really push for some of these things. And I'm thinking especially going back to the kind of the waste, fraud, and abuse side of it, it's going to be up to the everyday staffers in there and their bosses and their bosses' bosses to really push that, to get some of these things moving through the system and to actually start to work instead of just being kind of good ideas that the legislature happened to pass.
Well, and there's exceptions in a lot of these utilization controls. For instance, the limit on prescriptions is for a month, but if you need more than that, there's a possibility that the department could grant you more prescriptions. So the department's going to have to say no on a lot of things, correct?
Yeah, they're going to have to say no, or it's just going to be, it's going to fall a lot to those frontline people, I think, to really, they're going to be the ones who will determine ultimately whether you see the savings that are promised or not. And maybe it's not them that are making the ultimate decision. It's probably a couple people a step ahead. But yeah, it's going to be on the department, I really think, to do a lot of this.
Well, Senator Dale Wright, a Republican senator who worked on this reform, definitely hit that point a few times, saying that the department's really going to have to push this to get the savings that they want out of it. And Director Julie Hamos said, yes, we will. We know that this lands on our shoulders and that we're going to have to keep pushing it. But Republicans have been critical of the department in the past as far as not being aggressive enough on waivers. Do you think that they're going to see more of the same, or?
The department not being as aggressive? Well, I don't know. I don't think so, but don't have a crystal ball. I don't think so because, like I said before, the gravity of the situation. I think there's a real realization, or I would hope that there's a real realization among politicians and bureaucrats and everyone who's kind of involved in this process that this isn't about putting down a vote for an election. It might be for some people, but this is really about for all the hyperbole that our governor does. This is really about saving this system. I mean, it was either that or a tax increase aside from the cigarette tax, and there was certainly no stomach for that in the legislature. They'd already done that once. They're not going back to that. It's an election year. Everyone's up for election. They're not going to go back to that and try to run against that. So we'll see. Yeah,
and there'll be a lot of eyes on this thing. I mean, if they don't get substantial savings out of it, if they don't get something close to what they've promised, there's going to be some political cost to that for Quinn.
I think that, and they might go back and revisit it again next year. I mean, this is something where it's not a matter of we'd like to do this. I think we're to the point where it's now this has to get done.
And there is the built-in component. Currently, the state can carry over its Medicaid bills from one fiscal year into the next fiscal year and pay them out of those revenues. This package would also kind of phase that out, so they wouldn't have that option in the future as well. So that may make it so this program is pretty strictly implemented. We'll see what happens. But there is other news going on this week, so let's move on a little bit. A couple different lawmakers are kind of in some heat. One of the stories is relatively old and we're familiar with it. Derek Smith, the lawmaker that's accused of taking a $7,000 bribe in exchange for putting in a good word for a state grant. There's been a little bit of development with this, Drew. Can you tell us what's going on? Just kind of check in with it.
Sure. So I guess the committee that was deciding whether the House should move forward with disciplinary procedures said yes, we should. And now I like to call them a jury, but they're obviously not a jury in the sense that of a criminal sense, but a jury of lawmakers has been selected. And basically what you'll see is a case tried in the House, and you'll have Derek Smith and his lawyer there representing Smith, and then you'll have two House members kind of playing the part of the defendant, or the prosecutor, and trying to convince that jury to recommend then a punishment, if a
Censure
punishment
or
at all.
something. And
Yeah.
this is all going on as he's facing charges, real charges in the criminal system.
Right, and this amazes me how many steps are on this, because we have the committee, then we have this, and then if the committee decides that yes, we want to censure him or expel him, then it goes to a vote in the full House, which needs, I think, a 2/3 majority to approve any punishment against Smith.
So we still have some time in this whole situation. It's going to be a while until we have an end result.
Certainly, and kind of, some of the conspiracy theorists out there say they want to wait till maybe after November, after the election, to see how that plays out. I mean, it's definitely hasn't moved as fast as some people have wanted it, but it's also part of the reason for that, I think, is that you have lawmakers trying lawmakers, and they certainly don't want to set a precedent that could get them kicked out of office.
You do,
quickly.
and you also have pending charges. I mean, he hasn't technically
Right,
he
he's
hasn't
still
been convicted yet. So
innocent
it's
until
a
proven
kind of-
guilty.
and you wonder if this is going to step on the toes of the prosecutors in Chicago or interfere with their case. There was some grumbling about that during one of these hearings a few weeks ago or a month ago, where Barbara Flynn Curry was there, where they got a letter that essentially said, stay out of this.
Yeah,
So-
I think the letter said something along the lines of, you can use whatever knowledge the public has, but don't go looking any deeper than that, because that will interfere with our case.
Well, and then another lawmaker has kind of found themselves in a little hot water this week. This is kind of an ongoing story, too. Kevin, can you give us the rundown?
Schmidt, Senator Susie Schmidt up in the Chicago suburbs, northern suburbs. She is the one who last year 911 tapes caught her and her husband calling police on each other. They were having a terrible marital spat about her allegation that he was having an affair. And the reason that this becomes more than just lascivious is at one point she said to a dispatcher on the tapes, "You can ignore my husband's 911 calls. I'm a state senator. Here's my position." That sounded like it came awfully close to using her position to try and influence law enforcement. And under pressure from fellow Republicans, she agreed to step down after her current term is over in January, this coming January. The latest development is that she was arrested on Tuesday on some minor trespass and damage charges that had to do with her neighbor's house, a neighbor who was allegedly having the affair with her husband. And in the course of that whole arrest and booking and filing, and the neighbors filing a no contact order, they revealed that she had been allegedly harassing them for a couple months with calls and internet messages, and at one point allegedly said to their 7-year-old child, "Your mother's been having an affair with my husband." So, these things for the politician, even the politician who's not running for re-election, these don't look real good, obviously. And the Republican leadership in the Senate has been asked a couple times this week, what are you going to do? Are you going to try and get her to resign now rather than wait? Is this the last straw, as some people are suggesting? And what Senator Redonio's office has said repeatedly is we're looking at it, which is not a no. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if she steps down.
Drew, anything to add on this?
Well, the only thing is what leverage, I don't know what kind of leverage they would have.
They wouldn't have
over
any
her
leverage
because
other than to
she's
talk her
stepping
into
down.
it.
Yeah,
That's
it's
the
a matter
thing.
of saving face at this point.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, the other big issue that's hanging out there is pension reform. Lawmakers are hoping to return sometime over the summer to address pension reform because nothing was able to pass at the end of session. Governor Pat Quinn met with legislative leaders earlier in the month. He said he plans to meet with them again next week, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of common ground going on yet. Drew, what are your thoughts on what we're going to see maybe coming in the next couple of weeks?
Sure, Pat. So Governor Quinn is sticking by his guns that TRS, Teachers Retirement System, that those costs are shifted to the local school districts. So if Teacher A is hired at School District 186, then School District 186 has to pay for Teacher A's pension and be responsible for that. Right now, I think they kick in like 9%, 10% that the school district does. And that was kind of the sticking point that caused this whole thing to melt down originally. And just yesterday, I was listening to reporters talking to Governor Quinn up in Chicago, and he came out hard for this. He's saying that we have to do this. It's a matter of responsibility. It's no fair if you get to set the contract, how much a teacher gets paid, and then the state is saddled with that pension, which is based off what the teacher is paid. So, you know, it seems like it's at a bit of a stalemate right now. Well, it'll be interesting to see if what kind of solution comes about, because I don't see this passing without somehow some of the cost or future costs being passed on to school districts. It just doesn't seem feasible.
I think you might be right about that, but they can't. The idea that they could drop this on the school districts all at once at this point, I don't think was ever realistic.
No.
And you know, philosophically, Quinn and House Speaker Madigan had a point. I mean, these were costs that were caused by decisions made by the school districts that the school districts did not then have to fund. And so you can certainly make a rational case that you should fund your own decisions, but the other side of the argument is they simply don't have the money, particularly since the state has never properly funded the schools, and currently they're not even getting the money they're supposed to get from the state.
Well, and just doing stories about this kind of thing and other things involving school districts, talking to superintendents and whatnot, you know, the other place the schools can go is property taxes, and that's kind of been the complaint. You do this and property taxes are going to go up, and then that will definitely happen. Yeah. But in some of these communities, they're already hitting their cap. Right. They can't raise property taxes without a referendum. And again, in this kind of environment and in this economy, I really do not see anyone voting for their own taxes to go up.
Well, and we're going to have to leave it at that. Governor Quinn has called for pension reform to happen by the end of the month, so we'll see what happens. But I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and I'd like to thank my guests for being here. Kevin McDermott and Andrew Thomason, thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues, and you can check us out next week. But in the meantime, check out our Facebook page at Capitol View Politics, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.